What's up guys, welcome back. Today I'm doing another build. I'm happy to be getting back to doing some PC builds because we've been inundated with GPU reviews for some time, but I'm trying to accomplish three different things with this build. One is for anyone who is saddled with an extremely large graphics card, which we have here with the Gigabyte Aorus Master RTX 5080. How can you fit a very big graphics card in a very small case? We have a solution for that today. Secondly, as you can maybe tell, I have a bunch of all-white components and I've been wanting to put together another smaller form factor, all-white system. And thirdly, since it is finally springtime, I'm doing some cleaning and some reconfiguration in our living room area, and I'm finally going to be replacing the HTPC.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by the Paul's Hardware store on paulshardware.net, the only official source for Paul's Hardware merchandise, tantalizing t-shirts, brilliant beer sets, high-quality hoodies, and more, all featuring the classic thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers, or the 8-bit thumbscrew for tasteful and refined viewers who hate curves. New designs are added sporadically and at random, so head over to paulshardware.net and get some of that sweet, sweet merch right now. Or not right now, after you watch the video. Either way. What a beautiful pile of components that we have here. If you check the video description down below, I'm going to post the actual parts that I'm building with here, and I'm also going to post some swapsies, some things that you can swap out here and there. If you wanted to upgrade this system to the fastest possible gaming PC, for example, we're using an RTX 5080 today. There are RTX 5090s out there. All these are crazy overpriced, as I've discussed many times recently, so I'm not trying to tell everyone, hey, go out and buy 5080s right now. Please wait until prices have normalized. These should cost in the $1,000 to $1,200 range. Even for overbuilt versions like these, the Aorus Master, which has the white finish and is, again, absolutely disgustingly massive. 360 millimeters long, this GPU, which is the same length as a 3x120 AIO, which I think is what Gigabyte figured. They're like, all right, if people are putting 360 AIOs in their system, this card should fit too. But since I already had my sights set on a smaller form factor build, I was gonna go ITX, but then I realized, you know what, for something that big, especially with it being a 4-slot card, micro ATX is probably gonna be a better solution. So today we're building, in this case, a collaboration between Lian Li and Dan. This actually came out last year and it's got really good reviews. Excellent airflow, a slightly larger footprint than a mini ITX, but still keeps things on the smaller side. It's available in a few different versions. We're using the all-white version today, which has a plastic front panel. That version can usually be found in white or black for around $70 to $75. And then they have a wood front panel version, which I had my sights set on, but I wasn't able to source in time for this video. That one definitely looks a lot cleaner, and those you can purchase for around $95. So having an affordable case with good airflow definitely helps keep the costs down for a system which might otherwise be very expensive. Looking at you, RTX 5080 pricing. But if you wanted to upgrade this system to be the fastest PC you can build right now, you would swap out the 5080 for a 5090. Of course, you would only be paying MSRP for a 5090. Those are totally easy to find. You swap out the 7800X3D that I'll be using with a 9800X3D or a 9950X3D. I have two of these 7800X3Ds that I was using for benchmarking last year, but since I've switched over to the 9800X3D, the spare is going to be going into the HTPC. Oh, and yes, by the way, my HTPC connects to a 4K 120Hz variable refresh rate TV from LG, and that's why it's actually great for gaming as well. The third thing you would swap out would be the power supply, because you want 1000 watts for an RTX 5090. We have 850 watt unit from Lian Li here, which is suitable for up to an RTX 5080 or 5080 or below. And yes, I am reusing this power supply from the build that we did back at the end of December because it is all white and it has all white cabling. And even though this case does support full-size ATX power supplies, that's one of the other nice features of it. Going with SFX is going to give us a lot more room to work with in the case, since we are using such a large graphics card, and with the shorter cables and the nice all-white cabling, it's going to look nice too. Rounding out our cooling, we have a Thermalright Peerless Assassin 120 in white. Thermalright actually has a couple newer versions of their tower air coolers that perform a little bit better, but they're not available in white yet. So that's why I went with the Peerless Assassin, and that will still be perfectly fine for cooling our 7800X3D. The case does not ship with fans, so I have some Thermaltake CT120EX ARGB sync fans, which are all white, so they will match. And I was very torn about the motherboard. I like putting a micro ATX motherboard in a micro ATX case, but I already had the X870i Aorus Pro Ice on hand. So I decided to save a couple $100 by reusing this motherboard rather than swapping to a micro ATX B850 or X870 board. There are a couple of those available that would be easily swapped in here and would even give you a little bit more expandability depending on whether or not you have a 4-slot graphics card that's going to block all the expansion slots. So again, if you're looking to build this system or something similar to it, check the video's description for some alternative components to what I'm using, which might make a little bit more sense for you. Rounding things out with memory, I have a couple memory kits here. The one I'm probably gonna be using is this upper one, which is a Trident Z5 Neo RGB kit from G-Skill. It's a 32 gig DDR5 6000 kit, but man, the Ripjaw's M5s down here. If you're going for an all-white build, these just look a lot cleaner in terms of the various different types of finishes that G-Skill has for the memory. But this is a 96 gig kit, which would be kind of wasted on this build, and it's also not an Expo kit. So I think I might pop these in just for the visual, or I don't know, I might just be practical and install my Trident Z5 Neo RGB. They have this black line across the side though, which isn't quite as all white. And lastly, we have storage. I'd recommend a $100-ish 2TB NVMe SSD for anyone who's building a new system right now. Since this build is something that I'm planning to put into use though, I'm going with SSDs that I have on hand, which is this 1TB 990 Pro. Then I have this external AS1000 Plus NVMe SSD enclosure, which actually goes up to 20 gigabits per second, which is pretty nice. But this has a 1TB NVMe SSD installed, which I think I want to swap out for like a 4TB one. So I might pop the 1TB out of here so that I can populate both M.2 slots on the motherboard, but we'll see. We'll see, I might have a 2TB lying around that I might pop in there instead. So there it is, the components I'm building with today. Let's get started. Two big questions about this build. One is that graphics card actually gonna fit in this case? It should, I hope. Second is, this was delivered by Amazon, and I really hope nothing's broken inside, because it was rattling. Like there's something loose in there, okay? I should probably stop doing that and just see what the damage is. Okay.
Is that a screw box or something?
Probably. All right, so there's the Lian Li A3 Micro ATX, and this was actually pretty extensively reviewed because it came out last year in 2024. Earlier in the year, they started out with this version, which has a plastic front panel. And that was actually one of the things that was reviewed a little bit more negatively, is the front panel on this one. There's newer ones that came out later in the year that have wood slats up here that actually adds a little bit of ventilation, because this is just a solid panel up there. And my thought was I was gonna get the white and then try to swap in that wooden front panel, but I can't find it for sale anywhere. I should probably just hit up Lian Li directly and be like, hey Lian Li, do you have any of those? But aha, Joe was totally right. It was our box of screws that apparently came loose in shipping. Loose from where? Oh, there's a zip tie up here. It was zip tied to the power supply rack up there at the front, but there's that. So the positive things about this case, according to the reviews, is the fact that it's not that expensive. Again, the base version here, I've seen it for sale for like 70 bucks, sometimes 70 to $80. And then the version that has the wooden slats on the front panel is typically $10 to $15 more than that, or those front panels are sold separately. Or at least the black one was sold separately that I found. Or you can actually get like replacement panels for this I saw for sale on like sites like Etsy and stuff, with like wood carvings done in them and that sort of thing. But anyway, since this is going to be an HTPC, it's gonna live in the living room, and the HTPC that I worked on several years ago, which is mounted to a big slab of wood, but I'm gonna be removing that system and rethinking that, so I think I have some other ideas for what to do with that wood. But for that purpose, I wanted a case that didn't necessarily have like a tempered glass side panel and a bunch of lights everywhere. This build is going to have some RGB LEDs, which is kind of unavoidable at this point in PC building, but my intent is to turn them off so that they won't distract us while we're playing games or watching movies. Other than the price for this case though, the other nice things about it are the airflow, because it has ventilation everywhere, and they do have some dust filtration panels to cover where you might have intakes going on. You also have a variety of mounting points for stuff like radiators and fans. You can actually fit a 360mm radiator in this build, although depending on what components you have installed, whether you have a full-size power supply or not a full-size power supply, depending on whether or not you have side intake fans installed here, which Gamers Nexus found actually can hurt the performance of the GPU cooling in some situations. There's just a lot of different configurations for this case, and it being a not super tiny, but still pretty small build that supports micro ATX motherboards, it has the flexibility, the price, and the performance in terms of airflow that we've seen lots of builds in it. One thing I have not seen yet though with this case is something I'm going to try right now. can it handle this chunky boy? Measuring in at over 14 inches long, 360 millimeters according to the Gigabyte specifications. This is a 4-slot card unapologetically, and amongst all of the accessories that it ships with are a bunch of different rails so you can help support it so it doesn't sag, as well as an additional 120 millimeter fan that you can mount to the top here for even more aggressive airflow. And there's a chance we might be able to fit that in this system. If I can, I'm going to, mainly just for fun, but for funsies right now, I'm just gonna set it down. Just gonna pop it there, and it looks like it fits. I'm kind of stunned, but I am happy because when I was first figuring out what I was gonna do for this build, that was a big obstacle to overcome, finding a case that fit this GPU. What I'm also hoping works out kind of nicely, and we'll do a little bit of testing once the build gets put together, is that these intake fans for the GPU are going to be right up against the bottom intake, which I think might actually be good for airflow. Theoretically, who knows? We'll test it, we'll find out. Gonna get the motherboard set up next, and since this board was used in a previous build, I just disassembled it and realized, hey, there's a 4TB Lexar NM790 that was installed right here. Since this is for an HTPC, we're gonna wanna have maybe some movies, videos stored locally on the system, and games, of course. So I wanna have a pretty good amount of storage. Our Samsung 990 Pro is a very fast drive, so I think I'm gonna install this one here, and that's where we'll install the operating system and everything. And then our 4TB drive I'll install to the M.2 mount on the back, because this is actually accessible via the cutout on the back plate of the motherboard mount in the case. So by mounting this here, if I ever did need to swap it out, I would have a little bit easier access to it. And there we go. And then our Samsung drive will install right here. Perfect. Trying to do that thing where you suspend the entire mATX motherboard by the graphics card, but with the air cooler installed on there, it's a little bit top heavy, so I had to add some supports on this side. Still though, it's kind of a fun setup. I hope we're not stressing out the PCI Express bracket too much. We're about ready to start installing everything into the case, but before I do that, I want to make sure I have all the cables sort of arranged where they're supposed to go, because I'm going to want to be doing as much plugging in of cables before things get installed and start blocking things. Our motherboard, now that it's set up, has this very beefy air cooler on top, but also means that connective plugs along the edges, power supply plugs along this side are going to be a little bit tougher to get to. So I want to have those cables ready to go, so as I install this I can plug those in and hopefully make things a little bit easier for this stage of the build. Also planning the airflow, and I've realized that some of these fans I have are reverse blade, and because I'm building this for myself and I don't care quite as much, I'm just going to have those flipped the wrong way. But we're going to do two for exhaust here at the top, and then I do have one that is the proper blade orientation, and that will go at the back here for some exhaust. And Leanne Lee recommends that if you're doing an air cooler in this build for your CPU, that you have this rear fan set to exhaust. Come to the hardest part of the build, which is going to be plugging everything into the motherboard. So I've got, I think all the hardware ready and all the cables ready, and I put a box in here so I could kind of prop up the motherboard while I go around the edges and plug everything in. Like we've got a couple plugs for the fans. We need some LED headers that are going to be plugged in so that I can disable the LEDs on the fans after everything's installed. And of course our motherboard power connectors as well. I've been spending a little bit of time on cable management, just sort of tying things up to keep things tidy. Not finished, of course, and this case doesn't really have any place to hide the cables, so, you know, you gotta do your best. But at this point, we're ready to drop our graphics card in, and this graphics card has 3 fans plus the optional 4th fan, and I figured it looks like we have room for this. Might as well install it. How do you install this fan, Gigabyte? It includes this rubber gasket here, and the rubber gasket has some grooves. Those just fit around the edge of the cooler housing like that, and then it's got 4 plugs where this fan just, you know, shimmies down on top. That's all. That's enough to hold it in place, apparently. This fan does have its own fan header and RGB addressable connector. Fortunately, they're daisy chainable, so I'll be able to connect those to the existing ones. And now we install the graphics card. All right, here we go. Looks like it'll still fit. Maybe I should add that fan afterwards.
Yeah.
All right, we'll put the fan in afterwards. There we go. Needed a bit of extra support from the bottom side of the motherboard tray, but now our PCI Express catch has engaged. And on this motherboard, you have a push button to release. And oh my gosh, I'm so glad that that's the case. If I ever do have to remove this graphics card, that's going to be really helpful to have. The cable management still needs a little bit of work, but I'm at the point where I'm ready to give this thing a test run. Plugging it in, we saw a surge of power, which means the power supply should be, hopefully, connected properly. And now, moment of truth. Well, hey, a step up from last time. Almost all my fans are spinning. Oh look, it says, "Hi, Aorus." Yes, this GPU has an LCD screen down here, which after this case is side panel is on, we will never be able to see. But, you know, that's an aesthetic touch. It does have the little Aorus eagle dude. He's got a skateboard. All right, we have initial success. I'm gonna do a little bit more cable management, some tidying, some setup, and I'll be right back. All right, so that is the build as it came together. I hope you guys like how it looks, and I hope you're not being too critical of my cable management. I meant to go in and tie things down a little bit more securely and tidily, but I changed my mind at the last minute because it was gonna be a waste of time because I'm going to be changing this system. More on that in a second. First off, let's go over some performance numbers just to verify that the hardware I've installed is functioning as expected. The 7800X3D CPU, cooled by the Thermalright Peerless Assassin air cooler, only topped out at 60 to 65 degrees Celsius. That was during the 3D Mark CPU stress test, so pretty evident that you do not need an all-in-one liquid cooler in order to cool down an 8-core CPU, even one of the 3D V-cache like the 7800X3D. The GPU I was a little bit more interested in because it is positioned at the very bottom of this case, but thankfully temperatures are great there as well, and I can also use the little LCD screen to monitor real-time frequency and temperature. Under load, since it's got such a beefy cooler, it was only running in the low to mid 50s Celsius. It peaked at 57.2 degrees Celsius. If you compare that to the performance of the RTX 5080 Founders Edition, it usually runs about 5 to 10 degrees warmer than that, usually around 63 or 64 degrees Celsius. The RTX 5080 Aorus Master Ice has a manufacturer overclock with the boost clock set to 2805 MHz versus the Founders Edition that goes to 2617. That results in the Founders Edition running just shy of 2700 MHz, usually around 2660 to 2670, whereas the Aorus Master Ice was running at 2925 MHz and peaked at 2977, and that's with no additional tweaking or overclocking for me. That made it about 1.5% faster than the Founders Edition, which scored 16,458, and that's with the Founders Edition being tested with the 9800X3D and this card being tested with the 7800X3D. Finally, since I was somewhat curious to see what kind of a difference the fourth added 120mm fan on the cooler would make, I tested AB with that, and the short answer is about 1 degree. Or about 1.5 degrees Celsius difference by adding that fan on versus not having it there. In this case, since we do want a little bit more airflow, since a lot of it is being blocked by the graphics card, I think I would leave it in there. But for a lot of people who don't need just a slightly cooler GPU, you could probably leave it out. So I'm happy to say that even though we have installed the maybe second or third best CPU for PC gaming in this system, we're still achieving close to peak performance from our RTX 5080. Let's talk about the aesthetics of the build next. My cable management aside, I do like how this system looks all put together. And while we don't have a tempered glass or clear side panel to see the interior, we do have lots of mesh ventilation, so you can still get a look at the components inside with the side panel on, which makes me happy that we went with matching all white components, because if something wasn't aligning with the color scheme, I think it would still stand out. I also like sticking with all white for the RGB LEDs in this system, although I do have the option, thankfully, to turn the LEDs off with one button in the Gigabyte Control Center software, and then they also have the ability to disable the LCD screen if you don't want that lighting up if you're trying to game or watch a movie, for example. But that's about the only positive things I have to say about the Gigabyte Control Center software. I'm kind of not a big fan of how the companies like Gigabyte and Asus have made you install their entire control center in order to access their basic RGB functionality. I would love if I just had a little standalone tool to do this. The thing that made me irrevocably hate the Gigabyte Control Center software, and this is not the first time it's done this, is upon installation, without any input or selecting OK or anything from the user, it will automatically go into update mode, and I didn't get video of it, but it automatically starts installing Norton antivirus. I hate that, Gigabyte. If you're watching this and you take away one thing from it, stop it. Don't have it. I hate Norton. I wanted to boil this system in hot liquid in order to purge it of Norton, even though I alt-control deleted and forced stopped the installer. But I just found that to be perfectly egregious. Again, especially without prompting or asking or anything. It's just like, oh, you wanted to control your RGB? Here's a Norton bloated software package that sucks and everyone hates. Anyway, so if you ignore this driver and software page, I mean, there is some functional stuff that you can have it download for you on here. And it will do motherboard like BIOS and driver updates as well, which is somewhat useful, I suppose. But again, all I really wanted was the RGB Fusion software. Thankfully, our motherboard, our graphics card, and our G-Skill memory was all recognized. You can control them individually if you want it to look really bad, or you can just use the sync function, and then you have some basic RGB functionality over here. So I've mostly just been doing static white. I don't mind pulse, which sort of pulses, so it sort of lights up and then fades and back and forth. And you can control the speed for that. Flash and double flash are both dumb. Cycle cycles through pre-selected RGB colors. I wish you could go and like select or deselect these. That would make it a lot more functional. Rainbow wave is the typical RGB rainbow vomit, although it seems to have stopped working quite properly on this system right now. I will say between this and the Asus software I used most recently, I gotta give it to Asus because they do have a little bit more functionality in the RGB control. I like, for example, the ability to select various gradients that aren't like all the rainbow colors, but maybe just a few of them to give you some shift in color without going full RGB. But again, really the most useful one for me for an HTPC in the living room is gonna be the off button. We also have fan control in here, which is somewhat useful. I used it to quiet down some of the fans. We can take a look at some basic performance information on this tab, and then we have the LCD panel. And this is actually pretty full-featured in terms of control and everything. So given the absurd markup for the 5080 and 5090 Master, at least that one kind of cool unique feature you're getting, which is an LCD, does have some unique things you can do with it. There are several different enthusiast displays that have a little bit of animation. You can choose GPU temperature or other different information to cycle through, and you can even choose how long it takes to switch between those. And then of course you can add your own custom image or your own custom animation, or even your own text, although that took a long time to load for some reason, but obviously it's going to be the most accurate. of the displays I chose. There's a carousel option, so you can actually choose a bunch of these and have it cycle between those. And then lastly, you have Chibi Time, which is our little Aorus Eagle Chibi guy, and this will apparently start doing different things and show different stuff on the LCD if you start gaming or whatever you might be doing. Chibi adjusts its activities based on the GPU's status, ready for you to explore. Oh, and yes, there's an off switch for the LCD as well, so you can go completely no lighting in the build. Last thing to mention in terms of aesthetics is that the card does have 3 different RGB lighting zones. There's an Aorus logo on the top or on the back plate of the card. There's the Aorus logo on the side here, which is right next to the LCD. And then there are also small LEDs on the tip of each of the 3 fans on the card. On this case, of course, you can't see that at all unless you flip the case on its side and look through the bottom. It's also noteworthy that those LEDs on the fans don't actually light up unless the fans are spinning, but it does have a pretty cool effect when it's in use, and that is one of the aesthetic features that's unique to Gigabyte graphics cards. Rounding things out for this video, and this is very fitting since I'm building a new HTPC and I can't seem to make an HTPC video in one take. There are 2 reasons I'm going to be slightly adjusting this build before I put it into service in our living room. The main reason is that Gigabyte wants their RTX 5080 back. I kind of forgot as we were making arrangements and all of the emails flying back and forth back when the 5080 and 5090 first launched, that Gigabyte said this is going to be a loaner and we're probably going to request it back, and they have. So this graphics card will be going to a different reviewer to review again and do more tests on. And if you are in the comments section and anyone down there is like, oh, this is a dumb build by a YouTuber who got the graphics card for free, yes, I do get GPU samples pretty frequently, but not this one. The other issue though has to do with the power supply. When I first fired the system up and started to run a few initial tests, I noticed a lot of coil whine coming from the system. I initially suspected it was the RTX 5080, but it's not. It's our Lian Li SF850 850 watt power supply. We already used that power supply in a build that we took to Las Vegas to cover CES, and I don't remember it making this much noise. Can you hear it from here? Because I sure can. It's such a weird sound. It's like a tiny blender in a tiny pool or something like that. It sounds kind of liquidy, but since it's even doing it at idle, it's like if I resize a window on the desktop, I can hear it in the power supply, which obviously is not a good situation. But circling back around to the practical uses of this video, can you build a relatively small system with one of these new massive RTX 5080 or RTX 5090 graphics cards and still get yourself excellent performance as well as good cooling? I would say with this particular case in my testing, the answer is absolutely yes. And I guess the follow-up would be, could you go mini ITX and get something even smaller? And I'm sure there are going to be people who are trying to do that. But I feel like these 14-inch plus long 4-slot cards really are going to have a hard time fitting in some of those super small cases. But if you are planning a build similar to this, I hope this video has helped you make some of those decisions as well as figure out what is going to work and what's not going to work. And now that all these GPU launches are behind us, I have a plan for the next few weeks to do some stuff that I've really been wanting to do here at home. That includes clearing out the HTPC area and doing some spring cleaning in general, I think. I have a small woodworking project that I'd like to cover to make some shelves for that area as well. And then you might have noticed that there are a lot of Lego sets in that area, some that are completed and some that are still in the box. I've been adding shelves and attempting to keep all of that stuff sorted out, and I think I'm finally ready to move forward with my plan to make a secondary channel to do a little bit of Lego content, a little bit of brick building stuff. So if you guys might be interested in that, stay tuned and I'll follow up with more details. If you are interested in the parts that I used for the build today, check the video's description down below where I will list them all. And of course, if you'd like to hit the thumbs up button on your way out, that's greatly appreciated. And you can check out my store at paulshardware.net where you can buy yourself some shirts, mugs, pint glasses, or other high quality merchandise to help support the channel. Thank you guys once again for watching this video. Big thank you to Gigabyte for sending over the RTX 5080 for me to take a look at. And we'll see you all in the next one.